A guten Erev Shabbos. Great to be learning with you on a Friday. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on a Friday afternoon? Yehudit in South Carolina, wishing everybody a restful and rejuvenating Shabbos. John in Maine, Paul in the Great Northwest, Frank in San Pedro, Renee in Indiana, Paul wishing Shabbat Shalom, Bill in mid-Missouri, excited the semester's almost over, Gordo in Scotland, always great to see you here on Fridays. Live, Joe in the Inland Empire, Bella in Florida, Stephen in Augusta, Maine. Please pray for my mom who has been in hospital critical care since Monday, keeping a daily watch over her. Please God grant Stephen's mom a refuah shlema, a complete healing. We say amen. Shandora in the Bronx, Nancy in North Carolina, Ella's in the house, Ilanit in Silver Spring, Maryland. Welcome, everybody. Wasn't that an exciting page yesterday when we covered the Oven of Achnai story and the epic battle, debate, shall we say, between Rabbi Eliezer and the other sages? By any chance you missed yesterday, you definitely want to hear that one. It's probably the most famous story in the Talmud and certainly my favorite. Okay, we picked this up today toward the bottom of page 59b here in Tractate Bava Metzia, the 22nd volume of the Talmud. And with God's help, today we will complete our journey through chapter 4 of Bava Metzia, and the way that the Koren publication of the Talmud Bavli, is organized. With today's daf, we'll complete volume 1 of Bava Metzia, and God willing, tomorrow, when Shabbos ends in LA, we'll open volume 2. That's an arbitrary division. It's just the way that they're published. But we're about halfway through Tractate Bava Metzia. Okay. So recall that that Mishna number 8, which we opened yesterday, and the one that contains that incredible story about how Rabbi Eliezer was so aggrieved after he was excommunicated by the other sages for, just refusing to compromise, as it were. He knew that he was right in the law, as according to the tradition that he'd received, but the other sages overruled him, and the law is determined by, the majority of the sages in the generation. They had their reasons for overruling him. He should have gone along to get along. He didn't. He was excommunicated, and in his grief at no longer being permitted to learn and teach Torah with his fellow sages and students, he was just so woebegone that his tears, reached heaven. And at least according to his wife, when he was finally able to, sort of give, full expression to his grief through the Tachanun prayer, his tears were sort of heard in heaven. And somehow, that led to the early demise of his brother-in-law, Rabban Gamliel. So this was all in the context of the idea that even though the Holy Temple was destroyed 2,000 years ago, and some of the prayers that used to be heard in a more direct way in heaven were no longer able to be heard, really meaning that the spiritual level of the people had sunk below the levels that we had when we were much closer to the giving of Torah at Mount Sinai. Nevertheless, the gate of tears always remains open, and prayers that are expressed with tremendous sincerity and the tears of the supplicant, the tears of the person praying, they are always heard in heaven. You might not get the answer that you thought you wanted, but the prayers are heard in a way that less sincere prayers are not. So we continue this discussion here toward the bottom of page 59b. The sages taught one who verbally mistreats, and we were talking about that there is mistreatment of others, not only exploitation, financially exploiting somebody by charging more than the market value, but also this verbal exploitation, that when you demean or humiliate or use unwelcome nicknames for people, you are verbally mistreating them, and that's something you really need to atone for. And most people do this, don't even realize they need to atone for it, and that's why they become habitual verbal abusers of other people. Now, one of the laws relating to that is that it's specifically written in the Torah repeatedly that you cannot verbally mistreat the convert, right? You cannot remind a convert to Judaism that there was a time when he wasn't a convert and was doing things which are prohibited in Judaism. You cannot oppress him, mistreat him, etc. Now we're continuing that line of thought. The sages taught one who verbally mistreats the convert violates 3 prohibitions, and one who oppresses him in other ways violates 2. And the Gemara asks, what is different with regard to verbal mistreatment that 3 prohibitions are written concerning it in the Torah? And what are the 3? Exodus 22:20, and you shall neither mistreat a convert, and then in Leviticus 19:33, and when a convert lives in your land, you shall not mistreat him. And Leviticus 25:17, and you shall not mistreat each man his colleague or his fellow, meaning your fellow Jew. And a convert is your fellow Jew, so he's included in that prohibition. Now, with regard to one who also oppresses a convert as well, right? This is more like physical oppression, making him work harder than is right. So with regard to one who also oppresses a convert, as well as verbally mistreat him, 3 prohibitions are written. And you shall neither mistreat a convert nor oppress him. That's Exodus 22:20. And you shall not oppress a convert. Exodus 23:9. And you shall not be to him like a creditor. Exodus 22:24. And this last prohibition is a general prohibition about your fellow Jews, in which converts are included. So consequently, it is not correct that one who oppresses a convert violates only 2 prohibitions. Rather, both this one who verbally mistreats a convert and that one who oppresses him violate 3 prohibitions. Now, it is taught in a Baraisa that Rabbi Eliezer the Great says, for what reason did the Torah issue warnings in 36 places, and some say 46 places, with regard to causing any distress to a convert? And it is due to the fact that a convert's inclination is evil. Now, that's not to say that people who convert to Judaism tend to be evil people by any means. What they're saying is, i.e., he is prone to return to his previous way of living. And what that means is, in other words, he's going to violate many Torah prohibitions if he regresses to the way he lived before. And this is exactly why when a person seeks to convert to Judaism, the rabbis are obligated to say to this person, why do you want to do that for? You shouldn't do that. You can be a righteous person. You have 7 laws that obligate you as a human being, right? These are the Noahide commandments. And you can earn your place in heaven, and you can come close to God, and you can be a righteous person just by following those 7 commandments, which, by the way, include Torah study and learning about God, so that you can follow the first Noahide commandment to know God, right? To know about God and to connect with God. But if you become a Jew, then you're going to be obligated in, hundreds of more commandments. And it's so easy to come to transgress them, particularly if you haven't been brought up, and you, by definition, a convert was not brought up in this tradition, and it becomes so easy to unwittingly, mistakenly, or just by sheer, wanting to do the things that you grew up doing, end up violating Torah prohibitions. And by the way, philosophically, the same idea applies to people like me who are Baal Tshuva, who did not grow up as traditional, Orthodox observant Jews. And when we take on ourselves to become to become religious Jews, there's so many things that we don't know and that we, end up making mistakes about. And even if we do know, it's like we just grew up, doing a bunch of things that now are not permitted. And it's, and that's why he's called somebody who becomes a penitent, right? Somebody who reconnects with Judaism is called a Baal Tshuva, some master of, or somebody who is, within, on top of making teshuvah, because it's so difficult. Right? It's so difficult. If you grew up in it, right, the community that is from birth, FFB, you're just used to it, right? With us, like we didn't know there's all these like habits that you have that you just didn't even realize, and you have to be constantly learning and thinking about it. And it's the same challenge that a convert has. And because the convert is facing these kinds of challenges, you are to admire him and never give him negative, discouragement, negative reinforcement, saying, oh, you used to do all these things, don't you miss that, right? Like you can't remind him or her that, oh, don't you miss, eating that unkosher food? You don't say that. You don't make that kind of a statement to a convert. It is prohibited under these prohibitions that we're talking about. And what is the meaning of that which is written? And you shall not mistreat a convert nor oppress him, because you were strangers in the land of Egypt, right? So the Torah actually rarely does it give a reason for why we're commanded to do something, but this is one of those instances. You shall not mistreat or oppress the convert. Why? Because you, right, you, Jews who have been for generations, or have been, Jews for generations, you were strangers in the land of Egypt. And what is the connection? And we learned in a Baraisa that Rabbi Nassim says, a defect that is in you, do not mention in another, right? People in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. Since the Jewish people were themselves strangers, they are not in a position to demean a convert because he is a stranger in their midst. And this explains the adage that people say, one who has a person hanged in his family, right, that a relative was executed because of a capital crime, he does not say to another member of his household, hang a fish for me. As the mention of hanging is demeaning for that family. Maybe a little bit of an attenuated connection, but at any rate, we understand clearly that you don't remind neither the convert nor the Baal Tshuva that there was a time when they were not Jewish or not connected to Judaism. This is prohibited. And with that, we conclude our discussion of Mishnah number 8 here in chapter 4. Now, Mishnah number 9. And before I do that, there was just something else I was reminded, but perhaps I've already forgotten it. I'm not sure what I was going to say. Let's move on. Okay, Mishnah number 9. One may not intermingle produce brought from one supplier with produce, even if he intermingles new produce with other new produce, and ostensibly the buyer suffers no loss from his doing so. Okay, so now we're looking at the sages as the consumer protection agency, right? So the sages are issuing rules based on you shall not exploit your fellow, where the sages instituted really consumer protection decrees so that merchants will not come to engage in any deceptive practices. It protects the merchants from coming to transgress this prohibition on exploitation, and obviously protects the public who is buying from these merchants. Now we're on page 60a. Oh, and now I actually remember what I was going to say. When we're talking about so many of these laws, right, where a Jew has a heightened obligation to other Jews, right? And so you shall not oppress your fellow, exploit your fellow, etc. And there are people out there, anti-Semites, who will look at such laws and such decrees within the Talmud and say, you see, the Jews, they just think they're better than everybody else, and they have these laws that are all about Jewish supremacy, and that they can, exploit non-Jews. That's permitted, but exploiting other Jews not permitted. That is a totally false, accusation. This is an anti-Semitic, there's a whole genre of these Talmudic accusations. And obviously these are people who just, read a list of excerpts from the Talmud taken completely out of context. And I usually give the example that this is like, saying that there's a character in a play by William Shakespeare who says, kill the king. And therefore you can accuse William Shakespeare of sedition against the crown and that he is calling for the death of the king. I mean, the Talmud is so vast and there are so many voices contained therein, so many discussions of the law where people have absolutely contradictory positions, didn't end up being the law, but you could still take a quote like that out of context from the Talmud. So that's part of it, that these things are taken out of context. But there is also something else which I think is important to realize, and I think all groups have this, and that is that you do have heightened responsibility to the members of your family. You have a heightened responsibility to the members of your community, the members of your town, the members of your nation, that you don't have to other people, right? And it's not because you think that your family or your people are better than other people. It's just that we live in communities, we live in families, and it's, obviously rational and to be expected that you have an obligation, to take better care of the people that you are related to, right? I mean, we all function in society in kind of concentric circles, where whatever your smallest family unit is in the center, and then as you expand outward, your obligations are different to your cousins than they are to your immediate family, and you have responsibility that's different for your cousins than it would be for a much more extended, attenuated family, different community, etc. Like, obviously, we have heightened obligations and responsibilities to members of our immediate community, and that's not because there's some kind of ism involved, right? That's just rationally the way that humans organize themselves. I think that's worth mentioning. Okay, let's continue. Mishnah number 9, consumer protection by the sages. Now we're on page 60a, right? So the sages decreed that they can't mix produce, where basically what they're going to be doing is produce of different value, high quality produce and lower quality produce that sell at different prices. And you can't mix, lower quality produce into your high quality produce and sell the mixture as if it's high quality produce. Right? You can't dilute it. Same idea, like, a gas station can't add just a little bit of some solvent into the gasoline, and then sell it as if it's pure gasoline. That's for every product. Actually, they said, right, so now a little bit of a contradiction. So you can't mix high quality produce with other quality produce. You can't mix produce and produce for that reason, because you might come to mix produce of different values. But now, says the Mishnah, actually they said with regard to wine, they permitted one to mix strong wine with weak wine. So you can mix this kind of produce from different suppliers together. A merchant can mix strong wine with weak wine. Why? Because one thereby enhances it, right? He's making a wine blend. Now, one may not intentionally mix wine sediment with the wine, because that would be diluting it, right? Just adding extra sediment so that the volume is filled with something other than wine. But one may give the buyer wine with its sediment the seller is not required to filter the wine. He just can't add additional sediment in order to drain off some wine that he could sell to someone else. Now, one who had water mixed with his wine may not sell it in the store, right? So you can mix strong wine with weak wine, but you cannot mix wine with water. Now, this to our ear sounds strange because we don't mix wine with water, right? We buy bottles of wine and then we pour it in our glass and drink it. But in the ancient world, wine typically was purchased very strong, and then they would dilute it with water at the table at the time that they were drinking it. But once you dilute water with wine, that's like sort of the end stage. You can't sell it after that because how did you dilute it? How much water did you put into it? At that point, you have adulterated the product, and the sages decreed that you can no longer sell it. Right, so one who had water mixed with his wine may not sell it in the store unless he informs the buyer that it contains water. Okay, so as long as there's full disclosure, then you could do it, otherwise not. And he may not sell it to a merchant even if he informs him of the mixture, as although he is aware that there is water mixed with the wine, it will be used for nothing other than deceit, because the merchant will likely not inform the downstream buyer that the wine was diluted. Now, in a place where they are accustomed to place water into the wine to dilute it, and everyone is aware of that fact, then one may place water in the wine that he is selling. And the prohibition against mixing different types of produce applies only to an individual selling the produce of his field. By contrast, a merchant may take grain from 5 threshing floors belonging to different people and place the produce in one warehouse. And he may also take wine from 5 wine presses and place the wine in one large cask, provided that he does not intend to mix low-quality merchandise with high-quality merchandise. So it's all about deceptive practices, right? So obviously, if you're buying wine from a merchant, you have no reason to think that this merchant buys all of his wine from one supplier. Of course, he's buying wine from different suppliers, and he might come to mix it in a cask. That's normal for that business. But if he's mixing low-quality wine with high-quality wine, not weak wine with strong wine, but low quality with high quality, and selling it all as high quality wine, that would be a deceptive practice, and that is what is prohibited. That's the Mishnah. Now the Gemara. The sages taught, needless to say, if the price of the new produce, right, so newly harvested wheat, is 4 sa, this volume is a sa, so 4 sa per sella, and the price of the old produce is 3 sa per sella, meaning a higher price because you get less volume per silver coin. So one may not intermingle them together, right? You cannot mingle produce of different values because this would be deceptive. In fact, this is full-fledged deceit, as one is selling inexpensive produce at the price of expensive produce. Rather, even if the price of the new produce is 3 sa for a sella, and the price of the old produce is 4 sa for the sella, so the new is more valuable than the old, still one may not intermingle them. And this is because in this case, the price of the new produce is higher, as people want to age the produce, i.e. new produce is more valuable to those who seek to place it in storage for a lengthy period. Although it may be of inferior quality compared to old produce, people want the new stuff that will last longer in storage. And the Mishnah teaches, actually, they said, with regard to wine, they permitted one to mix strong wine with weak wine because mixing the wine enhances it. And Rabbi Lazar said, that is to say, every time a halacha, a law, is introduced with the phrase, actually, they said, it is an established halacha with regard to which there is no uncertainty, right? So when you see this formulation, actually they said, then you're talking about not just another debate point, but this actually became an established law. Now Rav Nachman says, and it is with regard to the period when the wine is among the wine presses, i.e. before the wine ferments, that they taught this law. When the wine is still in the process of fermentation, if different wines are mixed and ferment together, this enhances their flavor. By contrast, if they are mixed at a later stage, this will harm their flavor. Now the Gemara asks, and today, when people mix old and new wine, even when the wine is not among the wine presses, on what basis is mixing permitted? And Rav Papa said, it is because buyers are aware of the potential loss and they waive it. And Rav Acha, the son of Rav Ika, said, in accordance with whose opinion is this Mishnah? It is the opinion of Rabbi Acha. As it was taught in a Baraisa, Rabbi Acha permits mixing in a case where the product will be tasted before its purchase, because then there is no deceit. As when the buyer tastes it, he's immediately aware that it is a mixture, and the choice of whether or not to purchase that mixture is his choice. He's not being deceived because he tasted it before he bought it. And the Mishnah teaches, and one may not intentionally mix wine sediment with the wine, but one may give the buyer wine with its sediment. And the Gemara asks, but didn't you say in the former clause of the Mishnah that one may not mix sediment at all? And lest you say, what is the meaning of he may give the buyer wine with its sediment? It means that he informs the buyer that the wine contains sediment. No, this suggestion is not tenable. From the fact that the latter clause teaches one may not sell it in the store unless he informs the buyer, and he may not sell it to a merchant even if he informs him, it may be inferred that the former clause is speaking of a situation where one may sell it in the store even if he does not inform the buyer. Rav Yehuda explained, this is what the Tana is saying. One may neither mix sediment remaining from wine that he poured the night before with the wine of the next day, nor the sediment of the next day with the wine of the night before. But he may give the buyer sediment of that wine itself. And that is also taught in a Baraisa. Rabbi Yehuda says, with regard to one who pours wine for another, attempting to pour the liquid while leaving the sediment in the cask, that person may neither mix sediment remaining from wine that he poured the night before with the wine of the next day, nor sediment of the next day with the wine of the night before. But he may mix the sediment of the night before with the wine poured the night before, and the sediment of the next day with the wine of the next day. And the Mishnah teaches one who had water mixed with his wine may not sell it in the store unless he informs the buyer that it contains water. And the Gemara relates, they brought wine to Rava from a store, and he diluted it with water and tasted it, and it was not tasty. And he sent it back to the store so that they could sell it there. So Abaye said to him, but didn't we learn in a Mishnah, and he may not sell it to a merchant, even if he informs him? And Rava said to him, my dilution of the wine is evident to all, as I add more wine than typically is added. Unless you say that the storekeeper will add wine and sweeten the mixture and then sell it again when the dilution is no longer evident. If this is a concern, well, then there's no end to the matter. It should be prohibited to sell any wine to a merchant due to the concern that he engage in deceit in its resale. And the Mishnah teaches, in a place where they are accustomed to place water into wine to dilute it, and everyone is aware of that fact, one may place water in the wine. And it was taught one may dilute the wine by adding water that will constitute 1/2, 1/3, or 1/4 of the mixture in accordance with local custom. And Rav says, and it is with regard to the period when the wine is among the wine presses before the wine ferments that they taught this law. If wine is diluted at a later stage, the dilution will cause the wine to spoil. Bottom line, you can't engage in deceptive practices. Now, thank God, we live in a time where there's so much inspection of the foods that we eat, and God willing, accurate labeling, and we're much more aware of what we're buying and how, what weight is there and whether it's been diluted or not. We have a lot more information because there are consumer protections. But imagine in the ancient world where there was no such thing, right? And any merchant would just, tell you what he's telling you and sell you what he's selling you, and who's going to check up on him. But the sages instituted a bunch of these decrees, to protect buyers from being deceived and to protect sellers from engaging in practices that might be the norm in their industry, but which would be deceptive, and then they would have come to transgress. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 9 here in chapter 4. Now, Mishnah 10, the final Mishnah in this chapter. Rabbi Yehuda says a storekeeper may not hand out toasted grain and nuts to children who patronize his store due to the fact that he thereby accustoms them to come to him at the expense of competing storekeepers. So you cannot, right? I mean, how much of advertising is designed to capture young people to associate with a brand so that as they grow up, they'll be, lifelong adherents to that brand. I mean, tragically, right, in past generations, there was a lot of marketing aimed at children to get them to want to smoke a particular brand of cigarette, right, and become lifelong users of that cigarette, right? There was actually advertising aimed at children associated with certain cigarette brands. And certainly, if you're talking about cereal and so much else like that. So here's an early version of this where they said, you can't attract the children by just handing them out treats so that they'll, like you, and then as they become adults, become your customer and not the customers of other merchants. But the rabbis permit doing so. Why? Because any merchant can do that, right? I mean, it's not so deceptive to say, okay, well, I've got my general store and you've got your general store across the street. Yeah, I'm going to hand out, little health snacks. And so the kids will say to their moms, let's go to that store. Because, there's nothing deceptive or unhealthy about that. And any merchant can do it. So at a certain point, if it's not deceptive, the sages are not going to prohibit it. One of the sages would, but he was overruled. And one may not reduce the price of sale items below the market rate. I guess Rabbi Yehuda said that, but the rabbis say if he wishes to do so, he should be remembered positively, right? Not only is it permitted to lower your prices below what other merchants are selling for, the rabbis praise such a person. Why? Because he will come to lower the market price, and this will help the poor people. One may not sift ground beans to remove the waste, lest he charge an inappropriately high price for the sifted meal beyond its actual value. This is the statement of Abba Shaul, and the rabbis permit doing so. If he's going to add the labor of sifting it, making ground beans that are free of dirt, he can do that, and he can charge extra for it, and why shouldn't he? And the rabbis concede that one may not sift the meal only from the beans that are close to the opening of the bin to create the impression that the contents of the entire bin were sifted, as this is nothing other than deception. And one may neither adorn a person before selling him on the slave market, nor an animal, nor vessels that he seeks to sell. Rather, they must be sold unembellished to avoid deceiving the buyer, right? So, if you're selling your old car, I think it's perfectly permissible to give the car a wash, right, inside and out, and vacuum it and make it look as best as it can look for what the car is. Of course, that's permitted. But what you cannot do is turn back the odometer as if it has less miles than it really does, because obviously that is flat out lying and deception. That's Mishnah number 10. Now the Gemara. The Gemara asks, what is the reason for the opinion of the rabbis who permit the free distribution of toasted grain and nuts, right, which are, pretty healthy, but snacks that attract children? It is because the storekeeper can say to his competitors, I hand out nuts and you hand out jujubes, known as shiske. All merchants are able to hand out goods that will attract children, and consequently, this is not unfair competition. I said jujubes. I mean, somebody tell me maybe it's jujubes. I don't know this word. Jujubes. Is that a fruit? Oh, here, wait. Jujubes, known in Hebrew as shiske. The commentaries explain this word in different ways. Apparently, it is a form of the Hebrew shezaf, meaning the fruit of the jujube or the jujube tree. I just don't know how to pronounce that. So the Mishnah teaches, and one may not reduce the price of items below the market rate. And the rabbis say, if he wishes to do so, he should be remembered positively. And the Gemara asks, what is the reason for the opinion of the rabbis who not only condone the practice but even praise the person, saying that he should be remembered positively? And the Gemara explains it is due to the fact that by lowering the price, he eases the market rate, i.e. his actions lead to the establishment of a lower market price. Now, page 60b. The Mishna teaches, and one may not sift ground beans to remove the waste and charge a higher price. This is the statement of Abba Shaul, and the rabbis permit doing so. And the Gemara comments, who are the rabbis whose opinion is cited in this Mishnah? It is Rabbi Acha. As it is taught in a Baraisa, Rabbi Acha permits mixing and sifting and the like in the case of an item in which the change is obvious. Now, this kind of formulation is something we'll often find, right, that a named sage has a particular view, and then it says, and the rabbis say the opposite, and it means that the majority overruled him. But they overruled him according to a formulation of that law, that is what they agree with in overruling the other ruling, and who formulated that law. And so very often when it says, and the rabbis say, they'll ask, and who is the rabbis? And then they'll name a person. And it means that one person formulated the law in this particular way, and that's what the majority agreed with. But that's why, and the rabbis say would actually, mean one person. That's how we get there. Okay, where am I? Yeah. It is Rabbi Acha who taught in a Baraisa. Rabbi Acha permits mixing and sifting and the like in the case of an item in which the change is obvious, right? If it's clear what adulteration the merchant has made, in order to improve the product and to attract more customers, that's permitted. What's not permitted is where he's engaging in deceptive practices. Now, the Mishnah taught, one may neither adorn a person, nor an animal, nor vessels. When we're talking about people, we're talking about the slave market, tragically, as slavery was practiced a couple thousand years ago. So the sages taught, one may neither stiffen the hair of an animal to create the impression that it is more voluminous than it is, nor inflate innards sold as meat to create the impression that it is a more substantial piece of meat, nor soak meat in water in order to change its color and create the impression that it is a choice cut. And the Gemara asks, what is the meaning of one may not stiffen the hair of an animal? Here in Babylonia, they explain that it means to feed the animal bran water, which inflates its intestines and causes its hair to stand on end. And Zeri said in the name of Rav Kahana, it means scrubbing the hair clean in order to increase its volume. And the Gemara relates, Shmuel permitted sellers to place fringes on a cloak. Rav Yehuda permitted them to clean and adorn ornamented garments. And Rabbah permitted them to taper linen garments to cause them to appear more fine. And Rabbah permitted them to draw arrows to ornament garments. And Rav Papa Bar Shmuel permitted them to draw ladders for ornamentation. And the Gemara asked, but didn't we learn in the Mishnah that one might neither adorn a person, nor an animal, nor vessels? And the Gemara answers, this is not difficult, as this series of cases where the sages permitted adorning merchandise are cases of new merchandise. It may be decorated, as doing so merely enhances its intrinsic beauty. That ruling in the Mishnah, according to which adornment is prohibited, is referring to cases of old merchandise, as the adornment is meant to conceal its flaws. Again, you can, go thrifting, discover something, that's a great find, or that provides good raw materials, and then turn it into something new. I've seen some amazing videos of people who take just kind of old, discarded, jackets or blankets or all kinds of textiles, and then turn them into really beautiful new jackets. Well, they added a bunch of labor. Of course they can do that. What you can't do is take a jacket, you can't make a fake Rolex, right? You can't make a fake Rolex. And there's all kinds of fake Rolexes that aren't just, manufactured from scratch, but where, they take one Rolex, kind of break it apart into its pieces, add, fake parts, and end up with two Rolexes. where each one does contain authentic parts, but it also contains a bunch of fake stuff, and they try to pass each one off as an authentic Rolex. Obviously, that's deceptive and prohibited. The Gemara asks, adornment of a person, what is it? And the Gemara relates, it is as in that incident involving a certain elderly slave who went and dyed his head and beard black to create a younger impression. He came before Rava and said to him, purchase me as your slave. And Rava said to him, there is a rabbinic adage, let the poor be members of your household. And I follow their advice. And therefore, I do not require a slave. If I need assistance, the paupers who frequent my house can assist me. And then the slave came before Rav Papa Bar Shmuel. I'm almost done for today. If you've got questions or comments, please get them in now. So that older slave came before Rav Papa Bar Shmuel, pretending to be a younger slave, and Rav Papa purchased him. So one day, Rav Papa said to the slave, give me water to drink. And the slave went and removed the dye and whitened the hair on his head and his beard. And then the slave said to Rav Papa, see that I am older than your father. I am unfit to serve you, because even though he's a slave, he's an elder. And at a certain point, you can't, ask your slave to do menial work for you because he's your elder. And that means that Rav Papa was saddled with a slave who he couldn't ask to do these tasks, which is probably what he purchased him for, but he was still needing to, feed and clothe him and take care of him. Right? So in this case, having a slave provided no benefit to Rav Papa and a big expense. So Rav Papa read about himself from Proverbs 11:8, the righteous person is delivered from trouble, and another comes in his stead. And Rav Papa applied the verse to the incident of the slave. The righteous person was Rava, who said, I don't need slaves. I'm constantly feeding paupers who come to my house, and if I ever need to lift something, they help me. So he didn't get saddled, right, with this foolish purchase of a phony slave, right, who had pretended to be younger than he was, implying that he would do this work, and then once he was purchased, revealed himself to be older and not going to do that work. And then there's some discussion in the notes about this from the commentators. What kind of slave are we talking about? First of all, this if he was a Canaanite slave, it's not like he received the money for his purchase. Canaanite slaves would only be bought and sold. So maybe he just wanted to get away from his old master, or maybe his old master no longer wanted to care for him since he wasn't going to do the work. And so he kind of released him, and this guy would prefer to be a slave and be kept in a house than be free. Or he might have been a Jew who had become so impoverished that he sold himself into slavery. But at any rate, what we're really talking about here was deceptive practices in the marketplace, which are absolutely prohibited. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 10 here in chapter 4. And with that, we conclude chapter 4 and volume 1 of Bava Metzia as it is paginated and published in the Koren edition of the Talmud Bavli. Let's take some questions. Bill, worth noting at this juncture, our English word ethics comes from the ancient Greek ethos, a habit. Righteousness is a habit, and so too its inverse. Thank you, that's great. And that's in response to this idea that people who verbally mistreat others often don't even realize they're doing it, and they come to be habitual, verbal abusers. And that's why that person, we learned yesterday, might end up in Gehenna with no way out because he humiliated so many people in his life and never atoned for it. Renee, responding to that, says that the Hebrew word musar means virtue-based ethics, and we refer to ethical characteristics as midot. So midot literally translates as measurements. A Baal Midot Tovos is a master of good virtues. Thank you, Renee. That's a beautiful thing to bring out at this point. And think about that when we talk, because the word midos or midot right? Normally, we use it as our characteristics, right? Our attributes, and specifically the ones that we're always working on, right? So a person with good midot is somebody who doesn't speak lashon hara. It's somebody who looks at other people favorably and gives them the benefit of the doubt, who uses refined speech and has refined manners, and is always, looking to help others and not exploit them, right? This is somebody who's constantly working on their midot. Whereas the opposite of that is somebody, who is just crude and vulgar and abusive and manipulative and is always, abusing other people and humiliating them in various ways. That's what it was, evil midot, bad midot, the opposite. And that the word midot actually means measurements is beautiful, because what do we have to do? We have to be constantly vigilant, constantly examining the ways that we behave. And it's a good thing at the end of the day as you're lying in bed, if you had especially if you had an argument during the day or just any interactions you had, review it, right? Like I'm a somewhat obsessive golfer. I'm the coach of the U.S. Maccabee Masters team. One thing I teach my players, right, is like something that I just naturally do. After a round, you kind of play the round back in your mind to see what can I learn from it. And likewise, you had an argument with your spouse. Okay, in the heat of the moment, you're not going to realize anything. But later, when you've cooled down, you think to yourself, how did I get into that argument? It's just because I was totally thinking about myself and not the other. And I reacted and I was quick to blame. And, I got to work on that. I don't want to do that again. That's a situation when it comes up again. I don't want to repeat that habit. That's a person that's well on his way or her way to improving midot. But if you don't do that kind of a review, how are you ever going to learn anything and not repeat the same mistakes? Bill, I can see why the rabbis rule as they do. I mean, while I'm as wary of excess advertisement to the young as the next person, I grew up getting lollipops from the jars on the counters of my grandmother's insurance agent, from the bank, from the doctor's office. About the only place that didn't was the dentist, and even there, they had the healthy sorts of gum. And you come to, identify with those people who give out the swag as stores that you'd like to frequent later. I mean, there's no question, right, that the associations and relationships and bits of learning we do when we're very young, those stay till the end. So sadly, in the last few years of my mom's life, when she had dementia, frontal lobe dementia, after a while, there was just so many things that she couldn't say or do or remember. But just certain phrases, from her childhood in Hungary, those would start to come out, when she couldn't remember, what she'd said a few minutes ago, she could remember what she had said, decades earlier. The things we learn as a child, right? The tabula rasa, when the slate is so clean, what's imprinted there is forever, right? And that's why we have to be so careful about the education of our children. Obviously, a big topic for another day. Joe, that is like at Thanksgiving when stores sell turkeys at lower price than what they purchased them for. It's referred to as a loss leader, right? A lead item. They figure to make up the difference when people purchase all the other items for the feast. Exactly. Very good. Okay, my friends, that's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow night when Shabbos ends in LA. So it's later and later this time of year. But hopefully I can get on the air 9:15, 9:30 p.m., something like that, after Shabbos is out. And, we won't try to do a double daf on a Saturday night. But we are running a few pages behind, and we'll try to do some doubles in the coming days and weeks to get caught up. All the best. Have a great Shabbos.